It's time for Security Now. You remember the myth of Sisyphus, the fellow who rolled the boulder all the way up the hill at great effort, and then it just rolled all the way down, and he's had to start over again. It's a new form of hell. And Steve Gibson says, we're in it, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, our explainer-in-chief has become dejected by the state of security in the world around us. What's wrong with the Wemo and a lot more coming up next on Security Now.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Security Now is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com. This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 443, recorded February 18th, 2014, Sisyphus. Security Now is brought to you by Scott eVest, technology-enabled clothing to carry all your gadgets. Visit scottevest.com/twit now through February 24th to save 40% off all 14 of their bestsellers. That's scottevest.com/twit. Use the offer code TWIT13 at checkout. And by ProXPN. ProXPN is a virtual private network that allows you to use the internet the way it should be, anonymously and without oversight. For 20% off your new account, go to proxpn.com/twit and use the offer code SN20. It's time for Security Now, the show that protects you and your loved ones, your privacy online, your data online. Here he is, the data protector, explainer-in-chief.
And now your homes, Leo. We're going to start protecting people's homes.
Homes, too, yes, because we're going to talk about the Internet of Things today. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Steve Tiberius Gibson of Security Now fame and, of course, grc.com, where his wonderful program Spin Right makes its home. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Leo. Great to be with you again, as always. So this is one of those days where I changed course and the name of the podcast even midway through. Some people may see that the word Sisyphus is in front of them, or that was what the podcast was named, somewhat curiously. It was going to be called QUIC, Q-U-I-C. That is the name of some really good work that Google is doing. I mean, I kind of grumble like that when I now export my Google, my Security Now notes. All the links are actually links through Google, so they're monitoring anyone who clicks on links in the PDFs that I support because I authored it in Google Docs, which annoys me. So there are things that it's like, okay. But I tell you, the tech that Google is developing for making the web faster, getting pages in front of us. We've talked about Speedy, S-P-D-Y, was the enhanced protocol over TCP that Google was working on. And I was reminded of that because when I noted last week or the week before that Firefox had gone to version 27, one of the features in there was that they had added support for Speedy version 3.1. Well, there's another effort, which I think it's a little more aggressive, and it has some compatibility problems because it's using UDP rather than TCP. And there's just problems connecting with UDP because, for example, the web doesn't need UDP. It uses TCP. Well, what they've done is they've taken all the work they've done before and said, okay, can we do this over UDP? And if so, what would we get? Well, we can't talk about that today because there is just too much bad news.
I know that.
Thus, I renamed the podcast for today's Sisyphus. From the Greek mythology was, the guy that was rolling the big boulder up the hill, and of course it was a never-ending task. And when he stopped, it rolled back down, and he had to start again. Well, when I finally got through putting everything together for today, I was so depressed.
No, say it ain't so. Not you.
It's like we're losing this battle. And I have to say that after we're done, if listeners sort of sit back and think about what they've heard, they're going to realize that this world, this future where like there are actually all of these hackers fully engaged in poking holes in things is way more true than I would have imagined a decade ago.
No
I just
kidding.
sort of thought,
Wow.
okay, we'll
Oh,
get
boy.
it's math. Math, we can write this stuff correctly and we're not going to have problems. But boy, I mean, we're losing. We're falling behind. And one of the things that we'll see is that it's the commercial interests to the commercial interests rushing new features to market. I mean, wanting to, like, now we've got, people's thermostats and like with Nest and motion detectors and smoke detectors and doorbells and all this stuff is like, oh, let's go put it on the internet. Won't that be fantastic? Wherever you are using your smartphone, you'll be able to check in. It's like, okay. And this has already been given a name now. It's called the Internet of Things. And it's one justification for IPv6 because, boy, if all the appliances that you have in your home are on your Wi-Fi and then somehow sticking their tendrils out through your router onto the internet so that you out on the internet are able to access them, then things get a lot more complicated. And we see basically all of today's depressing news is the consequence of this. It is manufacturers offering features in an unfortunately insecure fashion.
Ugh.
And in many cases, clearly making an effort to do it right, but failing to do so. And the only reason you can really understand this is that really security-oriented people weren't involved when they should have been. It looks like security was added as an afterthought. And again, often it's like, now we're seeing, military-grade encryption. Well, yes, but if you hand out the key inadvertently, then it doesn't matter. That's military grade. And in fact, one of the mistakes that we'll talk about today, Belkin has made with their Wemo technology, their firmware upgrades are digitally signed and contain the key for signing. What? Which means you take any Wemo device, you reverse engineer it, you obtain the key, and now you can send your own firmware to anyone's Wemo device. Oh, Leo, I mean, it's really bad. Okay, so this week on Security Now, we've got a tiny tweak to Firefox. We got to talk about Kickstarter's data exfiltration that made the headlines and affected, many of us who are Kickstartees. And the predicted new wave in mega DDoS attacks. Bitcoin's protocol finally has a problem, which has caused Mt. Gox all this problems. CryptoLocker is getting incredibly greedy. Google bought a little authentication trio of guys that everyone was asking me about because of my work with Squirrel. And then we've got problems with Linksys, Asus, and Belkin. And then I want to briefly talk about a couple sci-fi updates and the fact that Squirrel the Squirrel UI page, I've been talking for several weeks about how I've been working with the Squirrel UI. It's now public. You can see a lot of the user interface. And in fact, it's an interesting way to sort of understand Squirrel because this is what I'm designing is what users who know nothing about Squirrel, not our listeners, but, people's siblings and parents, it's really designed to be easy to use. As a consequence, anyone can understand it. So that's also public. In fact, it's bit.ly/squirrelui, SQRLUI, if anyone's interested. And for those people who are listening live, the show notes for this podcast are already up on the server.
Did you see that the Google had bought an authentication company that uses audio authentication?
Yep, that's who I was talking about. It's just three guys and a patent. It looks like.
Well,
and they've only been around for 2 months.
Slick Login is the name of it. Yeah.
Yes, and I think what happened is Google said, "Oh, we've got an office in Israel, and they're Israeli developers."
They hired them for the people.
Exactly, they're smart guys. They basically bought 3 smart people,
Yeah.
and I'm not convinced that sending inaudible crypto from your computer to your phone makes any sense. I mean, that I'm proposing doing it with a QR code, basically,
right.
But we don't know anything else. They also talk about somehow using geolocation and Wi-Fi and NFC. They mix a whole bunch of stuff together, but then they say their secret sauce is that your computer whispers to your phone.
The secret sauce gets me every time, right?
Well, and the concern is they say, and you need no web, very low impact on your web server. Just 5 lines of code enables this on your site, which tells you that it is a third party. It's
JavaScript, and it's calling a library somewhere else.
Well, no, it's calling them. And so
it sends the sound to them. It has to, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, or they provide the sound.
Oh, the sound's coming from the website to you. That's right. Yeah.
Well, but again, from them, from the company.
But we've already talked about this. Google will never adopt a technology that is open and doesn't require Google and their participation, right?
And of course, again, that's my ultimate response. Is that Squirrel is 2-party.
Right,
I designed it so it's just you and the site.
Google's always going to want to introduce themselves in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Or somebody like them.
Yeah.
Hey, you are a Scotty Vest lover, yes?
I am. I am authentically. In fact,
where's the picture? You said there's a picture somewhere.
It's up on the Google Drive, our shared folder on Google Drive. Glenn, who I guess manages advertisers, sponsors, said, "Hey, Steve, we're going to get Scott Evest is going to be a sponsor on the podcast." And I said, "No kidding. That's what I wear." I love their stuff. And in fact, I was telling you, I think it must have been when I was up visiting Leo for New Year's Eve, because I had my Scott Evest hoodie with me. It's what I wear. And what's freaky is that I like the really lightweight one, but it's this, they call it fleece material, and you put it on and it's like you've got some sort of like heat shield or something. It's just incredible how it traps your own body heat. And so I in the mornings,
love it.
Yes, I mean, yes.
I'm wearing the new one, the Sterling jacket, which I really like. This is really nice. So we've, I think anybody who's watched you and me and any of the other stuff, in fact, going back to the screensavers days, we've always worn Scotty Vest stuff. Great to go to the airport because you've got so many pockets that, this one has, believe it or not, this jacket, which is a nice jacket, looks completely normal, 24 pockets. And it's that nice fleece that you
little like secret agent.
Oh yeah, all sorts of stuff in here. And it's fun because when you first get your Scotty Vest, as you mentioned, you go through the pockets because he has to actually put in each pocket, or doesn't have to, but he kindly puts in each pocket information about what you might want to use that pocket for. Like this one is
it's a
touchscreen pocket.
It's a distributed owner's manual.
Yeah, and you might want to put a bottle of water because it's got a little. This is hard because you can't see it. There's a little elasticized strap in here that would hold the bottle of water, and then like many Scotty Vest fleeces and jackets, this has got the keychain.
And that's removable. And there's a little card there that says remove this before washing.
Right. So this is a neat material. This is it looks like it is plastic, but it transmits capacitance. So you can put in there. It's a touchscreen pocket, so you could put in there your smartphone and still operate it, or your device and still operate it. That's what this card was for. It's the Clear Touch Pocket. So we love Scotty Vest stuff. I mean, they make shirts, pants. They even make boxer shorts, and I may not mention it on the air, but frequently wearing my
You're not going to have
Vest.
24 pockets in your boxer shorts, though.
No, I'm trying to think. It has a couple. Has 2 little ones. It's not designed. It's engineered. That's why they call it technology-enabled clothing. To carry and use gadgets easily, comfortably. As you mentioned, it's got you've always got the He calls it
Eyelets.
the personal area network, the PAN that goes through, so you could put your eyelets for your headphones and so forth. That's patented, by the way, so only Scott eVest has it. Also good for battery packs. I've used this for like with a GoPro. You can have the battery pack routed down. If you have it, I did this yesterday when we rode horses. You have the GoPro on your helmet, but then you route the USB thing to your battery pack through here. Very handy. There's a pickpocket guarantee. They will reimburse you up to $1,000 if you're pickpocketed while wearing Scott eVest. I wear it as whenever I travel, and I always keep my wallet in my Scott eVest because it's always safe. They're hidden pockets for cash and gadgets. Many of them have pockets big enough to hold a whole laptop. Over 10 million pockets sold.
You know, the lightweight hoodie that I wear, it's got little magnetic snaps that close the pockets.
Right.
Which is kind of cool. It kind of goes snap when you're not.
You can remove the
attention.
sleeves and stuff. Yeah. Here's the new polos. I really like these. I wear these a lot. This is the bamboo polo. They're so called because of the material, which has bamboo on it, which makes it wick, but very comfortable. It's like, I don't like wearing synthetics, and it's
but it's got like
nice.
A zipper up here in your upper left breast, so you can slip something right in there.
Yep. Well, they're having a sale to celebrate their 13th anniversary. I wear these a lot. This is the what do they call it? It's like well, no. These aren't pants. This is for rain gear. It's like a shell that you would put over. You could wear it as a windbreaker or a shell over, and that's really nice. For celebrating their 13th anniversary, they're doing 40% off. So if you're watching this and you're interested in some of this, then you might very well want to visit scottevest.com.
40% off across the board?
14 of their best-selling items, and it's just now through the 24th, so you want to hurry.
Wow. Yeah.
And go do this. Visit scottevest.com/twit. The checkout code is twit13, twit13. And it's SCOTTEVEST.com/twit. Take a look at the website. Take a look at all the kind. They have clothing for women, too. Lisa was wearing something this morning I really liked. Really pretty. As many as this, the Quest Vest has 42 pockets. I'm wearing the Sterling jacket. Some great stuff. And go visit the website because you can hover over the features and see everything that's going on, including their X-ray feature, which shows you what it looks like if you could see through the jacket. But you only have till 9 p.m. Mountain Time, February 24th, 2014, to take advantage of this sale.
That's what the TSA sees.
That's what they see, and they go, wow.
Body scan.
See, what I do is I just take the vest off with all that stuff in it and put it on the conveyor belt.
Nice.
Never have had a problem, ever.
Nice.
It's all of our photographer friends use Scott eVests, but it's more than vests. It's everything. A lifesaver if you use Google Glass or devices with limited battery life. You can put the battery in there. It is really great stuff. And by the way, if you're listening after February 24th, I would still use the code. Scott is known to kind of put sneaky stuff in there every once in a while. scottevest.com/twit, and you'll see all the 14 items that are on sale right now for 40% off if you use the offer code TWIT13 for their 13th anniversary sale. The trench is great. I have that. It's a trench coat. It looks like a classic trench coat.
Nice.
Good price. $120 when you take advantage of the offer. The puffer jacket, great if you're up in the snow. There's a Lola, the Margot cargo pants for the ladies. The women's Q-zip, the cardigan. That's what Lisa was wearing, the Lucy cardigan. It's really great. scottevest.com/twit, and do take advantage of the offer code TWIT13.
Whatever they're made out of, I just love that.
I know. I'm not a fan
stuff.
of synthetics. And oh, look, there's Jason wearing his Scott eVest. He looks good on you, Jason. He's got a bright red one. You can't miss him. Wow. scottevest.com/twit, offer code TWIT13. Come on in here, Jason. You got to see. This looks good on you. He actually found one that fits you? Is it long enough? Jason's like
Jason
8 feet tall.
Is he hard to fit?
Is he hard to fit? But you look good in that.
Well, thank you.
You look like you should be, one of the police at the Sochi Olympics, or maybe a doorman at the White House. Look at that. That looks good on you. Aren't they nice? Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Hey, there we go. and I match Chad, so you know.
Yeah, your hair, his hair, your jacket. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. we're all kind of fans. I think it's one of those things where he gets an 8-minute ad because we can't stop talking about it. Let's move on, shall we? Let's start with the news, the security news.
Well, before I get into doom and gloom, I wanted to thank John Woods. John Allen Woods is his Twitter handle, and this came in at 1:26 p.m. on the 13th of February via the web, and I saw in my feed at SGGRC. He said, "Just used SpinRite 6. Incredible! What a fantastic tool! Files are back!" Exclamation.
Well, that was fast. Yay!
So it's like, it doesn't get any better than that.
Yay.
Ran SpinRite 6. Files are back. Thank you very much. And John, I already responded and thanked him for
files done.
So appreciate that.
Yep.
So Firefox made a little bump in case our listeners wonder what that was about. I saw my Firefoxes updating themselves. I said, wait a minute, we just got that like a couple days ago. Well, this was a tiny one. This went from version 27 to 27.0.1 and basically just fixed a couple little problems which cropped up in 27. So this is unusual that Mozilla does a non-major update because they've been doing the major updates now so frequently that normally they're just able to sweep up anything that they need to in a major update. But this one they needed to fix, so there really wasn't much to see there. As I mentioned before, it reminded me about Speedy, which put me on to QUIC, QUIC, which is Google's really cool protocol for speeding up web stuff, which I hope we'll talk about next week because I really want to. I'm ready to go, but as we'll see, the week's news just overwhelmed us. Many of our listeners noticed that, or actually received email. I was even getting email from other people who knew that I used Kickstarter and were warning me in case I hadn't seen Kickstarter's email directly. So they got breached. Yancey Strickler, who is the co-founder and head of communications at Kickstarter, tweeted on Saturday, just this most recent Saturday, February 15th. He said, on Wednesday night, law enforcement officials contacted Kickstarter and alerted us that hackers had sought and gained unauthorized access to some of our customers' data, actually 2 customers. Upon learning this, we immediately closed the security breach and began strengthening security measures throughout the Kickstarter system. Now, I and our listeners, that first paragraph, leaves us with some questions. It's like, wait a minute, how did you immediately close the breach? How did some external law enforcement official know and tell you, like, you didn't know it yourself, and so forth? I mean, so there's things we don't know, things we may never know, and things, in fact, since no additional information has come out and we see sort of moved past it now, I think we know all we're going to. He did, calm some worries, saying that no credit card data of any kind was accessed by hackers. There's no evidence of unauthorized activity of any kind on all but 2 Kickstarter user accounts. And then he said, while no credit card data was accessed, some information about our customers was. Accessed information included usernames, email addresses, mailing addresses, phone numbers, and encrypted passwords. Actual passwords were not revealed. However, it is possible for a malicious person with enough computing power to guess and crack an encrypted password, particularly a weak or obvious one. So, that tells us that, thank goodness, Kickstarter, as you would expect, being, in the technology business, did things right. And in fact, they did them right from day one.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Somebody who did things right for a change.
Yes. In a Q&A that they posted, they asked themselves the question, how were passwords encrypted? And in fact, many people were authentically asking the question. And so their response is, older passwords were uniquely salted and digested with SHA-1 multiple times, which, that's very good for, like, the dawn of Kickstarter. And then they said more recent passwords are hashed with bcrypt. And of course, bcrypt, we've discussed, is a good password-based key derivation function. It deliberately uses the Blowfish cipher as its scrambling mechanism, but they chose Blowfish because Blowfish has a very slow key schedule algorithm. Remember that in a symmetric cipher, you whatever the input key is, the so-called key schedule is the algorithm which normally expands that data. It takes whatever the key length is, 128 bits, 256, whatever, and expands it out to a larger amount of data, because typically then you have multiple rounds of a simpler cipher, and each round is keyed uniquely with different data from this so-called key schedule, which was expanded from the actual input key. So Blowfish, it's a well-known characteristic of Blowfish that while it's a very good cipher and it's stood the test of times. Of course, it was designed by Bruce Schneier, I think, and maybe Ferguson. I don't remember, but certainly Bruce was involved, and it's still going strong. It's not preferred now because it does take so long to set up the key. Well, in something that you want to take long, like brute forcing a password, that you want something that is going to take a while and cannot be easily short-circuited. So they did that. But even before that, they were using unique salt, and unique means per account, which means that they can't take just an SHA-1 rainbow table or existing dictionary and apply it against that. And they were doing multiple iterations of SHA-1. They don't give us a count, but the fact that it's more than one means that, they from the beginning they understood how to do this. So, it's annoying that things got loose. In their email, they stressed the need, and I would say maybe overstressed, given how well protected Kickstarter users were. Except for the fact that our customer names, email addresses, phone numbers, mailing addresses, and so forth got loose. I mean, that's a big breach of personal data. But they were also then prompting people to change their password if they use the same password on multiple sites. That's not bad advice. The better solution is not to use the same password on multiple sites. But they've really gone out of their way to protect users. So we'll keep our eye out for any indication that these passwords had been breached. But they really did protect their users as well as anyone could expect them to.
I changed my password, but you're right. Given all.
Oh yeah, I definitely changed my Kickstarter password.
Yeah, why not?
I did that immediately.
Yeah. And I had, I was using a strong generated password.
Yep.
Somebody in the chat room, Jeff, suggested that perhaps it's because they use Amazon payments on Kickstarter that they had to adhere to a higher standard. I don't know.
Could be.
I mean,
it would be nice to believe.
Amazon holds the credentials, so even if you didn't do everything right, the best they'd get is the password, because they're not going to get a credit card or anything. Problem,
of course, is that Amazon is notorious themselves for not being HTTPS everywhere.
Right.
You have to be secure briefly, but stealing Amazon sessions is trivial.
I doubt I'm sure they had a back channel to Amazon for the payments. Who knows? I don't know, actually. I shouldn't say that. That may not be. I think it pushes you to Amazon, come to think of it, when you make a payment on Kickstarter. It pushes you to an Amazon page,
Yeah, and I think that technology is well done. I don't mean to disparage Amazon. I think they've done a good job. But Amazon, it's time to switch everybody over to HTTPS.
Yes.
So it's time. Past time.
It's time.
So there's been a record broken, unfortunately.
A bad one.
A bad
one you don't want to break, yeah.
And that is that Cloudflare blogged about deflecting the largest DDoS attack they've ever seen, the largest one anyone has ever seen, now touching 400 gigabits per
we
second.
had John Graham Cumming, who works at Cloudflare, on Twit on Sunday. He talked a lot about that. Really interesting. Yeah. Really interesting. And he does a great white paper on how that happens on the Cloudflare site.
In fact, I've got a link here in the show notes to John's link. It's titled Understanding and Mitigating NTP-Based DDoS Attacks. And so this, and you just heard NTP, this is what I talked about a month ago, is that, this is now it's the new darling of the bots which are attacking, because it gives on the order of 550 some amplification of bandwidth.
You could start with a megabit connection and get a 400 or even 500 gigabit per second attack with a megabit connection. Yes.
So, what they wrote, there was some interesting data here in the Cloudflare discussion of this. They said, not just theoretical. And they said Monday's DDoS proved these attacks aren't just theoretical. To generate approximately 400 gigabits of traffic, the attacker, and now this is their own metrics, this specific attacker, to generate this 400 gigabits that they deflected, the attacker used 4,529 NTP servers. Okay, so that's a little over 4,500 network time protocol servers scattered all over the internet. And that map you showed, I also have it here in the show notes, are the locations of those network time protocol servers.
Quite evenly distributed globally, just everywhere.
Yeah. And so you'll notice that or you'll remember from my discussion of how this works, that somebody is sending requests to those 4,500 servers for the list of all of up to 600 other requests they've received for the internet time. And so the request, however, has its source IP spoofed. So it uses source IP spoofing so that those 4,500 servers believe that the target of the attack, someone, and in this case, it was an account, as a website that Cloudflare was in the business of protecting from these attacks.
Yeah, he didn't name names either. We don't know who.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so somebody sprayed these 4,500 NTP servers with requests for their list of people who've contacted them, the most recent 600, spoofing the source IP, so they all 4,500 of those servers aimed their responses, focusing it down to a single IP that was the target of the attack. So the blog says the attacker used 4,529 NTP servers running on 1,298 different networks. So this is almost 1,300, too shy of 1,300 different networks. So 3 or 4 NTP servers per network scattered, as you said, Leo, globally. On average, each of these servers each of the 4,500 plus NTP servers sent 87 megabits of traffic to the intended victim on Cloudflare's network. And this is one of the other problems with this attack, is that more so than DNS servers, which have been used in similar reflection attacks, NTP servers tend to be running on big iron. DNS generally isn't very high bandwidth. It doesn't necessarily have high bandwidth connections. NTP servers generally are running on routers, big iron routers, and they've got NTP service just sort of running as a side effect of just, the fact that they're running a system that offers all of these common internet services.
It's kind of a default service uncommonly on servers.
Exactly.
So they may have disabled it. Unless their clients need it, but it seems like it's just not. It's always on, right?
This is the problem. It's on by default,
right?
And so this posting continues saying, remarkably, it is possible that the attacker used only a single server running on a network that allowed source IP address spoofing to initiate the requests. Right. They said while NTP servers that support monlist, that's the command, monlist, are less common than OpenDNS resolvers. They tend to run on beefier servers with fatter connections to the network. Combined with the high amplification factor, which remember is like 500 plus, 550 times, this allows a much smaller number of NTP servers to generate very large attacks. For comparison, the attack that targeted Spamhaus used 31,000 OpenDNS resolvers to generate a 300 gigabit DDoS attack. On Monday, with 1/7 the number of vulnerable servers, the attacker was able to generate an attack that was 33% larger than the Spamhaus attack. So it's interesting, too, because in the research I did for this, I ran across, it might have been in John's posting or maybe lower in that blog posting, where the author was sort of musing about, I'd like to talk to whoever it was that even came up with this monlist command. It's like, why? It's like, why do you care? Why would you have a command to tell some arbitrary NTP server to tell you who it's been talking to?
Right.
It's like, who cares?
But that's a long list, presumably, and that's what fuels the DDoS, because sending that response back to the target is going to jam its pipes, especially if it comes from many, many, many NTP servers. There are other similar amplification attacks. We've talked about them before. You could ask a router for its tables, things like that, right?
Well,
a BGP router.
Normally, routers that you talk to are TCP, and TCP cannot be spoofed.
Saves that, right.
Yes. Right. And so that's the great danger.
To be UDP, okay.
Yeah, it's got to be UDP because that doesn't involve the three-way handshake that among other things, verifies the IP address at each end.
It is trivial to configure the NTP server to ignore that request.
Yes, and that is so there's several things you can do. You can not have raw sockets available to the operating system that doesn't need them, and then software is unable to spoof the source IP, or the ISP could block the departure of packets that do have spoofed source IPs. Remember that and this is called egress filtering. We've talked about it in the past. Any ISP is like they're hosting some set of IPs. It's like, if it's a cable modem company, they're like 24 dot IPs, right? So that ISP absolutely knows what its IP space is. All they have to do is block packets egressing, leaving their boundary, their network border that don't say they're coming from their IP space. Because for this attack to work, it's necessary for packets to be leaving an environment with a different IP that are lying about that generating that source IP. And so all you have to do is just drop those packets. Put a filter, a simple filter rule in your outbound routers that interconnect the ISP to the internet, and this problem goes away. You can no longer spoof source IPs. So that's a general mitigation for all spoofed source IP reflection attacks across the board. And then, of course, the ultimate solution, which we will never reach, because many of these servers are in closets. They're the famous server in the closet that it just sits there. It hasn't been rebooted for 10 years, and it won't be. But mitigation of this would be good too. That is to say, as you said, Leo, turns out it's a simple configuration line. You add a line to the NTP config file saying, don't tell people who we've been talking to. Just disable that monolith command. It's trivial to do. And the problem also goes away that way. So that would be nice. Now, it is the case also that if you're generating 87 megabits from the average router, probably running NTP, all aimed at one location, that should show up as a blip on the radar of the people in the NOC, the Network Operations Center, for the people running these routers, or these NTP servers, probably a service running in a router. That ought to raise a question in them. It's like, wait a minute, why do we have a bunch of routers that are all suddenly generating 87 plus megabits of traffic aimed at a certain direction? And all they have to do is look at it and go, oh, we're being used, our server is, or this router probably is being abused by some attacker and used to do NTP amplification and reflection. So that would motivate them to simply fix their server. So this may be something over time that gets fixed, but wow. And the other point I wanted to make was that while this attack was happening, other aspects of the internet, not the victim, were affected. And that's a consequence of the way the internet works. Remember when I first talked about the idea of when it was on our first podcast about Ed Snowden, and how traffic was concentrated. I was using the example of Google, how as data was coming closer and closer in terms of hopping from one router to the next, it was approaching Google. And this was where I used the original, at that time it was speculation, but it's since been confirmed, that all the NSA had to do was tap outside of Google, because the traffic would have been concentrated down by the time it got to Google, so that you could just monitor nearby and you'd be getting all of Google's traffic. Well, similarly, an attack of this magnitude means that it might have even been bigger than 400 gigahertz, but routers several jumps away were overloaded and unable to handle the attack. Because again, it's a concentration. And so if you had less capable routers, which were fine for normal, day-to-day internet traffic, but the point is that even before the last few stages of concentration, an attack this size would have, and did in fact, bring down other routers just that were trying to do their job of forwarding the traffic, but there was too much incoming for them to send, and the other sites that were not even related ended up being knocked off the internet. Because the point is, this was so overwhelming that you just could, several steps away, the attack got so big that non-targeted hardware could no longer handle it. I mean, it's
pretty impressive.
Weird phenomenon.
But it's something you probably can only do once. I would imagine the people who perpetrated this had it in their back pocket for a while and then used it, and know that now NTP will probably be widely patched or disabled, and you probably can't do it again.
I mean, the people in the know are not happy that this happened, right? Because this was theoretical. It was, in fact, there's a link at the top of this article. I have in there, Leo, the uscert.gov link.
Yeah,
that's their report about the concern over NTP, over UDP reflection attacks, and they list many different services which can be used to attack.
DNS, NTP, SNMP, NetBIOS, SSDP, CareGen, QOTD, BitTorrent, CAD, QUIC, Network Protocol, and Steam Protocol.
And if you scroll down a little bit, they also show the amplification factor.
Right. NTP is the best one of the bunch.
Yes. And so that's what we're seeing.
Right.
But in fact, John was saying that SNMP, that's another.
He mentioned that one. Yeah.
Yes. That's Simple Network Management Protocol. And that's the one where, and in fact, that may be what you were referring to.
Spam House. That was the
earlier.
Spam House attack was SNMP, wasn't it?
Yeah, but because there are SNMP queries where you say, tell me everything about what's going on in your router, and it dumps a phenomenal amount of information out.
I would just hope that this now that the word's out that these things are, it seems like they're easily fixed for future reference. Right?
Yes, absolutely easily fixed. It's again, this is like this is if this particular podcast has a theme, and unfortunately it does. Yeah. It's this sense that we're not going to win this. I no longer believe that we're going to win this. I think new stuff is happening at an accelerating rate. Everyone knows that. You know how I feel about new. It's just bad. In fact, someone commented that they thought they got a kick out of the fact that the screenshots I have for the forthcoming Squirrel UI, which I posted, and he said, it was a listener who said, I got a kick out of the fact, Steve, that they're XP screenshots. It's like, oh yeah, they are. That's
of course they are. What else would they be? You think Steve would install Windows 8 just for screenshots? Come on.
Oh, it's new. It's bad.
The factor that CERT gives is actually low on SNMP. I think that John said it was actually much higher. It would be.
I think it's vastly higher, Leo. Yeah. Maybe they're doing a little misdirection, hoping that the bad guys don't notice. SNMP. I mean, I use SNMP. I've got like a screen here that monitors what's going on at GRC, and so I'm querying using SNMP the various hardware that I have in our level 3 facility, our data center, constantly getting its packet counts and so forth. And I remember when you traverse this. The SNMP tree, it's like this dotted decimal notation, which has all been standardized, and they're called I can't remember there's a name for that. It's not SMBs, that's server message blocks, but there's something which is like this well established protocol for enumerating the contents of network equipment over Simple Network Management Protocol. But boy, you can ask it a question that it'll give you a huge answer to.
The Spam House attack was OpenDNS. I'm sorry.
It was DNS.
Myself on that. Yeah. So UDP is in a way the problem. You're not going to get rid of UDP, but we certainly should look at all protocols that use UDP and mitigate.
And you could go to the protocol end, or you could tell ISPs. There's now a
this is what he was suggesting. Yeah.
Yes. There is a well-established standard for egress filtering where ISPs simply drop packets which are carrying spoofed source IPs, and that would end this problem. I mean, and even if all ISPs didn't, it would mean that it would be much more difficult to find. You'd have to explicitly then find machines in non-filtering ISPs that that weren't doing this blocking, but still, blocking really does make sense.
Interesting.
Okay, so there's that.
Yes.
Now we have the Linksys router moon worm.
The hack of the week. Now what?
Oh my Lord. So I wasn't aware until I followed some links where this was discovered. But because the very, Ars Technica reported, Windows IT Pro was doing reporting on it, and all that was said was that it was a Wyoming-based ISP. Well, it turns out it's an old friend of ours, Leo, Brett Glass. I've known Brett. You've known Brett for decades.
Great tech journalist, yeah.
Yes, yeah. He was at InfoWorld for a long time while I was there. and he is really he's a techie's techie. So what Brett wrote, I thought was interesting because it was in a posting to one of the Ars Technica pieces. He said, "I'm the ISP who discovered the worm."
Brett was an early WISP, wireless ISP guy. I don't know if this was his WISP or it must have been.
No, it is. He is still, because, he's like in the boonies of Wyoming, and there was no internet service anywhere. And he and I have talked about him getting Pringles cans and like going up to water towers out in the middle of nowhere and like aiming the can, or maybe it wasn't a can. It might have been I can't remember the name of the antenna he was using, but Yagi, I think it was a Yagi is the name I was thinking of. I mean, so he was really pioneering bringing internet to farmland out in the middle of nowhere, and as you said, being a wireless ISP. So he said, "I'm the ISP who discovered the worm. It was not saturating our entire ISP's bandwidth." Actually, that was a misstatement that Ars Technica's reporting made. He said, "We don't let a customer commandeer unlimited bandwidth, but it was consuming users' bandwidth allocations, slowing down their legitimate activity and interrupting streams and VPN connections." He says, "I discovered the worm when these users called to complain of poor performance, and I employed a packet sniffer to investigate the cause. I've now seen hits from thousands of exploited routers, but the number of infections worldwide is likely to be much larger, hundreds of thousands, if not more. Just as the media is beginning to chatter about, quote, the Internet of Things, we're starting to see serious exploits of these things. The potential for harm and invasion of privacy is breathtaking, and it's of great concern that Linksys was recently sold by Cisco," he says, parens, "which has ample security resources," close parens, "to Belkin, which does not."
Right.
We'll be talking
not that
about
Cisco
Belkin.
was doing anything right with Linksys anyway, but all right.
Yeah, I was going to say, not like
they may have
Cisco's
had
was a
resources,
fabulous-
but they didn't apply them.
So Brett poses the rhetorical question: will Belkin be able to handle this breach as Cisco could have?
Could you describe what this malware does? This is new, right? We've not talked about this before.
No, this is brand new. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else. Brett says, in any event, the security exploit that's used by the worm will work in all current and recent Linksys routers.
Oh, because Linksys said older E-series routers.
Yeah, I know. That was not true.
Ooh.
All current and recent Linksys routers, including the entire E-series. And he says, yes, parens E1200s with the most recent firmware, version 2.0.06.
Probably the best-selling router out there, by far.
Which is why Brett brings it up. I mean, Brett knows his stuff.
Yeah.
He says, are vulnerable after all.
Jeez.
The Valet series and some with WRT part numbers. For example, the WRT 160. However, this particular worm seems to focus on the E-series and appears to be aimed at marshalling a botnet. So far, it does not appear that the malware flashes itself in, so it can be removed by a reboot. But it appears that any router with stock firmware that's exposed to the internet at a public IP address, which is to say all of them, can be reinfected even if it has a secure password. And finally, he says, I am continuing my research into this worm, as are the folks at SANS, who are fantastically bright and competent. After I informed them about the malware, they duplicated 99% of my work in less than a day and forged on ahead. So that was from Brett, who discovered this. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else to add. We know that it connects to port 8080 and runs a CGI script on the router, which downloads and executes a 2 megabyte program which then scans other vulnerable routers. But it lives at this point only in RAM, and reboot clears it. Now, of course, the problem is that unless we get firmware which solves this problem, we are subject to reinfection, and other worms can be designed which may not be as nice behaving. So this apparently, people who have looked at this say, this appears to just be replicating itself in order to show that it can. Now, Linksys has put out an official statement saying Linksys is aware of the malware called the Moon. By the way, the Moon, it was named the Moon by the guys at SANS because as they took it apart, they found some HTML pages and images from the movie of that title, The Moon. So that's, which by the way, is kind of a funky.
What's the movie, The Moon? I don't even know that.
Oh, it's good. Yeah, it's definitely worth watching. When Oblivion came out, in the early last summer, which was still one of my favorite movies of last year, Tom Hanks. I'm sorry, not Tom Hanks, Tom Cruise. Several people said, that's a little reminiscent, a little derivative. And so I then saw The Moon because it did not get great reviews, and it's funky, but it's definitely, if you're a sci-fi person, I would recommend it. Anyway, so Linksys says is aware that the malware called the Moon has affected select older Linksys E-series routers and select older wireless N access points and routers. So as you say, Leo, they're stressing older, but I believe Brett, he wouldn't say this otherwise. The exploit to bypass the admin authentication used by the worm only works when the remote management access feature is enabled. Linksys ships these products with the remote management access feature turned off by default. So that's significant and happily mitigating. Customers who have not enabled the remote management access feature are not susceptible to this specific malware. Customers who have enabled the remote management access feature can prevent further vulnerability to their network by disabling the remote management access feature and rebooting their router to remove the installed malware.
We tell everybody to do that, right?
Yes.
That's the remote, that's WAN administration. Is that what the...
Yes. Yeah. The advice from this podcast from day one has been, that is a bad idea.
Yeah, and you don't need it.
Yeah. Often, there have been manufacturers who have it on by default, they enabled by default. So absolutely disabling it if you don't need it is what you should do. However, the mistake here is that this was an exploit of the URL parsing in the server listening on port 8080 running in the router. And so it was one of these buffer overflow, super long queries that was able to execute shell code essentially, and that then was enough to get the router to go download the malware, which is much larger, 2 megabytes, into itself and run it. So in their Linksys knowledge base, there's a bunch of information per model number and per router. I created a bit.ly shortcut for it, bit.ly/themoonworm, all lowercase, bit.ly/themoonworm, and that will take you to a URL which is ridiculously long, which is Linksys's knowledge base for this problem. And it says there, the Moon malware bypasses authentication on the router by logging in without actually knowing the admin credentials. Once infected, the router starts flooding the network with ports 80 and 8080 outbound traffic, resulting in heavy data activity. This can be manifested as having unusually slow internet connectivity on all devices. So if anyone feels like something has gone wrong and you have a Linksys router, this may be what's gone wrong. But on the other hand, remember, if you didn't turn on, if you've got firmware that has this off by default. It would be interesting if that's where this older firmware comes in.
Maybe that's what they're saying is we
yes.
Yeah.
Is that the older firmware had it enabled by default, and they're not saying that. So the newer stuff has it disabled by default. But, a responsible network person who who had a reason for needing remote management access would have given it like a really good password and thought, okay, I'm probably safe. Well, and so the takeaway here is no. Unfortunately, there is some sort of buffer overrun in the parsing of the query string, which allows remote hacker-provided code to take over your router. So you definitely want to turn off remote management access until this is fixed and patched and verified.
The Linksys remediation page also says check the box that says filter anonymous internet requests. And I guess the impact on that would be it would break multicast, or I don't know what you'd need that for.
Anonymous internet requests.
Make sure that's not checked. Whatever the hell that is.
That doesn't sound good.
You don't want to allow anonymous internet requests, do you? Really?
The only thing I could think is that you're probably you're challenged for a login, admin, and password, and then your requests carry that response back in the headers, and so it's no longer anonymous. So, but you need it. I would think you'd need it the first time in order to make an anonymous request in order to be challenged for the logon credentials. But definitely turn it off unless you know you
can't think of a reason why you'd want that. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Continuing the hit parade. One down.
Of course, putting DDWRT on your Linksys is probably the best idea.
Yes. In fact, that was another piece of advice I saw elsewhere was by all means install third-party good firmware. Buy the hardware from these people that make the blue boxes and then stick real community design
software
for real
software.
software.
Good software on it.
Yeah. Oh, Lord. So speaking of Belkin, it was bizarre that Brett, talked about the Belkin's purchase of Linksys and wondered what it meant, and then also brought up the Internet of Things, both rather prescient here, because this is just today, February 18th, this morning, we get the news. And in fact, in my notes, I said, speak of the devil, Belkin. Slashdot has the story, and this is regarding Belkin's so-called WeMo, W-E-M-O. And I didn't even think to wonder what it actually stands for, because I was going to say if it was Waymo, then this is Waymo access than you intend to give to your household appliances.
I think it's like remote. I don't know. I've used them. I love them. We reviewed them. They're great. I don't think they're that widely used.
500,000 of them, or 500,000 users apparently.
Okay.
They're claiming. At least that's only 1/6 as many people who have Java in their
You
devices.
can control your Wemo with if this then that, so you can have it respond to various things. It has a motion. There's motion detectors. There's turn on lights. They're all internet connected. So
if this then that, that's a cool little thing. That sounds like a little logic flow.
Oh, you haven't seen that site?
No.
IFTTT.com. Oh, you're going to love it.
You're telling me you're giving some website access to the devices in your home?
Oh, sure. What are they going to do? Turn off the lights? Oh, there's a lot of stuff you could do with if this then that.
Oh, nothing could go wrong with that.
No. It's wonderful. It puts the internet to work for you.
That's right.
How could you not? I use it. It works with the Nest. Works with the Hue lights. So, for instance, when the sun goes down, I have my lights turn on.
Because of some third-party internet site that's like sending commands to your home?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I just sign into my if this, then that, and I create a recipe. It works with Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Craigslist, Google Drive, Foursquare.
Well, then in that case, I have a context for you, Leo.
Yeah.
The context of this next story is that hackers don't even need to break in to if this, then that. to gain direct access to the devices you have in your home, which are light switches, outlet plugs, motion detectors. They're also announced in this year they're partnering with Mr. Coffee, the Crock-Pot Company, and Sunbeam, and others to bring home automation to your favorite everyday appliances.
What does explain why the other day I came home and my coffee maker was on, my thermostat was turned all the way up, all the lights in the house were on, and the TV was set on a porn channel? I thought it was my kids.
Run away, Leo.
No.
You've lost control of your home.
That happens when you have children. It's the same.
So a security researcher who has a little firm, IO Active Inc. I had his name here, and I don't see. Oh, Mike Davis. They put out a press release. There's a link to it. There's that PDF. Oh, sorry, not the PDF. The link above in the show notes, Leo. It says IO Active Inc., the leading global provider of specialist information security services, announced today, that is this morning as we're recording this, that it has uncovered multiple vulnerabilities in Belkin Wemo home automation devices that could affect over 500,000 users. Belkin's Wemo uses Wi-Fi and the mobile internet to control home electronics anywhere in the world. Yes, even from the Ukraine, when you're not anywhere near the Ukraine, directly from the user's smartphone, and for that matter, anyone else. I'm adding that, of course. Didn't mean to embellish their press release. Mike Davis, IOActive's principal research scientist, uncovered multiple vulnerabilities in the Wemo product set that gives attackers the abilities to remotely control Wemo home automation attached devices over the internet. Number 2, perform malicious firmware updates. Number 3, remotely monitor the devices in some cases. And number 4, access an internal home network. So they can use this as a beachhead. They can use the installed Belkin Wemo device essentially as a proxy to get onto your home network. Davis said, quote, "As we connect our homes to the internet, it is increasingly important for the Internet of Things device vendors to ensure that reasonable security methodologies are adopted early in development cycles, product development cycles. This mitigates their customers' exposure and reduces risk." Yeah, no kidding. Another concern is that the Wemo devices use motion sensors, which can be used by an attacker to remotely monitor occupancy within the home. Once an attacker has established a connection to a Wemo device within a victim's network, the device can be used as a foothold to attack other devices such as laptops, mobile phones, and attached network file storage. So, little details here, drilling down into this. As I mentioned to you, Leo, at the top of the podcast when we were talking about, this craziness, the reason I named this this podcast Sisyphus, for some reason, Belkin's firmware signing key is included in the firmware. The Belkin Wemo firmware images that are used to update the devices are signed with public key encryption. Oh, that sounds good. To protect against unauthorized modifications. Okay, good. However, the signing key and password are leaked on the firmware that is already installed on the devices. This allows attackers to use the same signing key and password to sign their own malicious firmware and bypass security checks during the firmware upgrade process. Meaning that, okay, so it's nice that public key and crypto, public key crypto encryption is been used for the firmware. It should not, however, include the private key and the password. Whoops. So currently it does. Then they use SSL only for privacy, not for authentication. And in fact, we're going to loop around back to this misuse of SSL a little bit later in the podcast. So what does that mean? we've talked about how SSL provides two things. It provides privacy through encryption, and it provides authentication through the use of the whole SSL security certificate hierarchy rooted in certificate authorities. But Belkin's Wemo devices do not validate secure socket layer certificates, preventing them from validating communications with Belkin's cloud service. That is, all the communication. See, these things, when you access one of these devices from your smartphone is connecting to Belkin's cloud, and the devices have static connections to Belkin's cloud. And so it's through the cloud intermediary that you're able to, be notified to change your temperature in your house, turn on the crock pot, and so forth. Unfortunately, even though they're using SSL, the devices don't do certificate validation. So it is completely possible for the SSL connections to be intercepted and bad guys to take them over that way. And as this report says, this allows attackers to use any SSL certificate to impersonate Belkin's cloud services and push malicious firmware updates and capture credentials at the same time. Due to the cloud integration, the firmware update is pushed to the victim's home regardless of which paired device receives the update notification or its physical location. So it's not good. And they use, in order to do NAT traversal, we've talked about NAT traversal in the past. There's the so-called stun and turn, STUN and TURN protocols. And it turns out that they've been implemented in a way that allows them to be abused. Their report says the internet communications infrastructure used to communicate Belkin Wemo devices is based on an abused protocol that was designed for use by VoIP, voice over IP services, to bypass firewall or NAT restrictions. It does this in a way that compromises all Wemo devices' security by creating a virtual Wemo darknet where all Wemo devices can be connected to directly and with some limited guessing of a secret number controlled even without the firmware update attack. So, I mean, it's not good. Finally, the Belkin Wemo server application programming interface, so their API, was also found to be vulnerable to XML inclusion vulnerabilities, which would allow attackers to compromise all Wemo devices. So then this wraps up. It's like, okay, wait a minute. Was this disclosed responsibly? I mean, this is big news, and this is not good news. They said under responsible disclosure, IOActive feels very strongly about responsible disclosure and, as such, worked closely with CERT on the vulnerabilities that were discovered. CERT, which will be publishing its own advisory today, and that is online, made several attempts to contact Belkin about these issues. However, Belkin was unresponsive. Due to Belkin not producing any fixes for the issues discussed, IOActive felt it important to release an advisory and recommends unplugging all devices from the affected Wemo products.
That's too bad.
So, yeah. So this is, this, again, as I said.
I mean, really, seriously. So they can turn on lights in your house. And they can monitor your motions, I guess, if you have them everywhere in the house. I mean, most people wouldn't have them everywhere in the house. What is the worst thing that could happen from this?
Okay. I mean, it's a function of what you plug this into.
Well, yeah. If you plug it into your iron lung, they could kill you. But I doubt you plug your iron lung. Mostly, this is about plugging in lamps so that you can turn them on remotely. The motion sensors, I guess, if you had them everywhere in the house, then a bad guy could see if anybody was home. But they're not everywhere in the house. They're, there's maybe in the living room. I mean, nobody's going to, they're too expensive to put everywhere in the house.
How about remote access to your internal network? That's not good.
But so they can get into my Wemo and then use the Wemo to hack my...
As a proxy, because it's on your network.
Is that theoretical, or is there actually a way to do that?
There's actually a way to do that. We're not wanting to talk about that too much because
okay.
it's
all right.
so bad.
All right. So because they could easily get into the Wemo itself, the Wemo is a dumb device, but they could use that as a gateway into the Wi-Fi network.
Because it's on your Wi-Fi network.
Bypassing any WPA or any kind of security.
Well, because it's on your network. It had to have your network key in order to be on your network, and it's using your network and your network connectivity in order to get out onto the internet. So if its firmware is abusable, or if even if its cloud services are abusable, then that allows a way for people to get into. I mean, this news just hit, Leo,
right? And
so we will not long from now be hearing about exploits of this in the same way that unfortunately obscure vulnerabilities get exploited,
right?
And it's like this weird authentication bypass on the Linksys routers. Well, someone discovered that there was a bad.
But that's your router.
overrun.
This is the thing that turns the lights on and off. I mean, it's not.
No, it is a router. They've turned this into a router. I guess it is,
right? Yeah,
this is a router,
right?
Yeah, and you mentioned that they were dumb and not smart, and that's the problem.
Right.
Unfortunately, they are underpowered, so that they're not able to do an SSL certificate verification.
Yeah.
And so,
of course.
So it's like, oh well, we'll use SSL.
If I put it on the guest network, for instance, would that make it more usable?
Isolating it from your home network, or setting up a second router that is only for your questionable security devices. That makes a lot of sense.
And then definitely don't attach it to your iron lung.
And if you're a person, if you've got a Comcast router that has a public Wi-Fi hotspot, in your living room, hook it up to that one.
Right. Share that with the world, right?
Exactly.
By the way, we found, somebody emailed me, there is a switch you can go to the settings at Comcast and disable it if you dig deep enough.
Yes, and many people also commented in our coverage of that if you just use your own hardware.
Yeah, I use an Apple router on a Comcast network. Obviously, they can't. Yep. I don't have a Comcast Wi-Fi device, and no one should. All right, nope. I'll consider. I don't have any Wemos because I didn't find them all that useful. But that's the real attack is it's a unguarded pathway into your WAN.
Yes, well, that's the worst thing. I mean, having your lights turn on and off, and having the. I mean, see, here's the problem, Leo. Next up is webcams, and nanny monitors and baby monitors, and I mean, we're seeing the tip of the iceberg. You can imagine Belkin has 20 more devices on the drawing board. I was talking about this Sky Bell that a friend of mine has, which is a video doorbell, and it's the same thing. It's in the cloud. And so what we're seeing is because these are also price sensitive, they are they're running the smallest processors, the least amount of memory. They're really cut down technologies, but then they're leveraging technologies designed for full-scale systems, like SSL certificates. But whoops, we're self-signed certificates work just fine because we're not checking to make sure that they're signed by a valid certificate authority because we can't afford the storage. Right. Remember when Hong Kong post office?
These are little devices. They're little doohickeys.
Yeah. But they're like playing in the major leagues now. They're now on the internet, and they're bridges into your home network.
And there will be lots of these. I mean, Nest and Hue and Wemo. I mean, all of these, Sonos, all of these. There'll be lots of these. So.
And when you start off saying, well, what damage can be done because it turns my table lamp on and off. It's like today. Wait till, and we need to get a handle on this. And the Internet of Things, as Brett said, and, as even the IO Active guy said, it's here. It's coming.
But for now, keep it off your iron lung. And banks, if you're using Wemos to open the safes, the vaults at a given time, probably shouldn't. That'd be a mistake.
I'm not using any of this stuff, Leo. Like I said,
you're using XP, Steve. We know you're not using it.
And I have a 2001 car, and I'm quite happy that I still have to have a key that I put in and turn.
It's how long before you move to a cabin in the wilderness? All right, moving. I will take that under advisement, and I long ago retired any Wemos in my house, but just because they were dumb.
How long have they been around?
Oh, a year or so. Yeah.
These Weebelows.
Wemo.
Okay, and ASUS routers are exposing the entire contents of the USB drives that are plugged into them. Oh, by the way.
Great.
So, ASUS Tech is also been non-responsive. People are now finding a text file on the drives, which they intended only to be used. The idea, the backstory here is that ASUS routers now allow you to plug a USB, a big USB storage stick into the back of them, 64 gigs or whatever, are very common now. And that creates a shared file server for your home. You're unfortunately sharing it a little more widely than you believed. Default settings for the FTP server allow WAN-side anonymous login. ASUS calls this feature limitless access rights. And the authors of this letter call this madness. And there's something called AI Cloud, where it turns out those usernames and passwords were stored in plain text in a file available for download without logging in. So that gives attackers access there. What people are finding on their storage devices, that's how people are being awakened to this, is a file called warningyouarevulnerable.txt. And the files, this is a text file that just appears on your home's internal network storage that says, this is an automated message being sent out to everyone affected. Your ASUS router, parens, and your documents, close parens, can be accessed by anyone in the world with an internet connection. You need to protect yourself and learn more by reading the following news article. Then there's a link to nullfluid.com/asusgate.txt. And it says, below is a list of all the vulnerable IP addresses that have been leaked. And I don't remember the number. I think it's 4,000 have been found so far. If you are reading this, you are vulnerable too. And then there's a link to a paste bin URL with the list of all the IP addresses. Solution: completely disable FTP and AI Cloud immediately. I hoped we helped. Sincerely, G. Now, once again, this has been known for a long time. A guy named Kyle Lovitz in June 22nd, so more than a year ago, attempted to report this to ASUS. He created a security focus posting, which is now there in the archive. He says, timeline: contacted ASUS 2 weeks ago under my online handle account around 6/6, so around June 6th. Second email sent on 6/10 when discovered first unauthenticated file disclosure. Received only one response back stating it was not an issue. Sent a third email on June 14th. Only response received was an acknowledgement that my email was received. Attempted to call their development or incident team and was told that somebody would call me back on 6/17. Sent another email today under my real name. Never received any communication from ASUS. So he says, under mitigation and temporary fixes, users need to be alerted to turn off AI Cloud service immediately. So this is another cloud service designed to, connect your router to the cloud, and it's been done wrong. All web access to both HTTP and HTTPS need to be halted until proven safe. UP&P services need to be turned off. And he said in parens, I'd say that's a safe bet is for all home routers to turn it off. And of course, that's our standard advice too. And he says disable FTP and Samba services until the problem is fully understood and patched if possible. So, and he says, by all means, change the default username and password. Do not leave it as it was. So this is, again, breaking news. This has just come to light, and ASUS has unfortunately not been responsive to this. So we can hope that they will be shortly. At this point, anybody's using this AI cloud technology needs to turn it off, because from the outside, from the WAN, if this AI cloud services are turned on, you do not have the protection which you assumed ASUS had been providing based on this reporting. Ouch.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, okay, no Asus, no Linksys, no Belkin. Okay. Pretty much you're putting the entire tech industry out of business. You understand that?
Not a bunch of good news today.
They're putting themselves out of business is what they're doing.
Well, yes, and this is the problem. I mean, okay, anyone can be forgiven for making a mistake. That's not a problem. But in every instance, these companies have known for months. They've been notified by responsible researchers who discovered this and tried to say, oh, my God, everybody who's using your cloud service is vulnerable. Everybody who's using your 500,000 that you're bragging about Wemo customers have, you've basically installing little routers that are breaching your security every time you install one of these things. Fix this. And the problem is these companies don't respond. They're in the consumer electronics business. They just want to sell hardware. And unfortunately, with what they're doing, with the services they're offering, comes responsibility. Oh, it's like I said.
If the Navy can't keep itself safe, what are we supposed to do? You've seen this story. Iran was hacking the Navy.
Oh, Lord.
In fact, apparently the Iranian hacking of the Navy is more extensive than originally thought. The Wall Street Journal said yesterday the cyber attack targeted the Navy Marine Corps Internet, which is used by the Department of the Navy to store websites, host non-sensitive information, handle voice, video, and data communications for the Navy. They've been in the network since November. They're just living there, having fun, cooking hot dogs.
APT, Advanced Persistent Threat.
Yeah. From Iran. Who knew?
Yeah.
What else you got? This is the Sisyphus episode, ladies and gentlemen.
I know. This is just...
We've been pushing that boulder up the hill, and yeah.
Now you understand why I just thought, oh, my... Yeah. So depressed. So we did... I don't remember if we did it before we began recording or not, but...
No, we mentioned this on the air, yeah.
Okay,
Slick
good.
login stuff, yeah.
Slick login. Basically, I think Google they weren't in love with the technology. They just bought some smart programmers.
They call that an acquire, A-Q-U-I-H-I-R-E. They hire by acquisition.
Ah, yes.
Acquire.
A malware researcher was surprised when Gmail blocked some malware that he was deliberately sending to some other researchers. The reason this surprised him is that he deliberately zipped the malware with a, there's Sisyphus.
Sisyphus, rolling the boulder up the hill.
That's great artwork.
Is this nice? This is an old 70s animated short about the myth of Sisyphus.
Yeah. So this researcher had been... I got distracted by the beautiful animation. The researcher had been for years is encrypting malware in a zip, and the reason you can do that is that
I'm just superimposing Sisyphus over your face.
Wonderful.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. He's still pushing that boulder, by the way. Yeah.
Yes, he's going to be pushing it for a long time. We won't be running out of things to talk about, Leo. There's that for sure. So he'd been zipping his malware in zips, encrypting them using the password infected. And that's standard industry practice. When I've been downloading these various CryptoLocker malware, they're all posted, and they come to me zipped and under the password infected. And what's so nice about zip is that it is not just locking the archive, it is encrypting it. So it's encrypting it under that password, but that's the way it gets through AV scanners is encrypted. So what was discovered just recently is that Google has begun peeking inside zips and probing the zip to see if it is encrypted under the I have to turn off my videos. So
I'm sorry.
I
can't resist it. Roll in that boulder.
Poor guy. I feel sorry for him.
Yeah. And then, of course, he gets to the top, and what happens? It just rolls right back down. He's going to start over.
Yeah, okay. I'm not going to watch anything.
Okay.
So
that's interesting. So Google, now we know that Google scans inside zips. This is news that they scan inside password protected zips.
Yeah, that's the news. Yeah. And this researcher was curious. This is Brian Baskin who did this work. He was curious, so he first re-encrypted under a different password, and Google still flagged it. And he said, "What? How can that be?" So then he did an experiment where he took the most frequently used 20 passwords and put malware encrypted under those, and Google only saw the one encrypted under infected. So what he realized was once Google tripped over a zipped malware that was zipped under infected, it also remembered the file name. So that when he re-zipped it under a different password, he had left the file name the same, and Google still said, nope, once caught, never good. So nothing, no matter what he did.
That's weird.
Isn't that weird?
It's using a CRC or something to identify the file? Obviously something beyond the name.
Probably just the name. It is
using the same name.
We just saw something that was malicious with this name, so we're not allowing the same name to be used again.
Got it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's trying to protect you, obviously.
Yeah, and and the idea would be that and this is what's puzzling, is that malware researchers, like, for example, I'm distributing CryptoLocker with zips with that password.
Right.
I'm not emailing them to people, but you'd have to deliberately type in the password infected.
Right. And that's the point of it.
Exactly.
Do you think this is because the password was infected that Google just tries that, or are they able to somehow magically see inside zips that are password protected? No,
and that's just it. They can't, because it's true encryption. It is
really
it's
encrypted.
Real encryption.
Yeah.
So what they're now doing is they must be
trying the password.
Yes, they are trying that password for every zip that comes their way.
That's bizarre. I don't know why you would waste time doing that. Because it's acknowledging that it's affected.
Yeah, it's saying.
No bad guy's going to mail you something with a password infected.
Right, and if you open it and execute it, exactly. Yeah, and that's the theory under which GRC makes the malware available for people who want to test their networks and test their AV with all kinds of warnings and cautions. It's still, hey, you're hopefully an adult. Treat this responsibly. So
I want to hear a response from Google on this.
Yeah,
I want to know why they're doing it, or whether this is a false finding somehow. It's odd. Okay.
Don't know. So, CryptoLocker is getting greedy. I posted an updated version of CryptoLocker. Actually, I think there's a newer one that I didn't update my malware page with, which one of my frequent Twitter followers, he saw Simon Zarafa mentioning to me that there was something newer that he'd come across. I think then he messed around with it with a VM. He was a little surprised when, yes, he got the crypto lock, the standard crypto locker, you are locked screen. You can insert your own 4-letter word in replace of lock. And they now want 5 Bitcoins, Leo. Now, remember once upon a time...
Well, Bitcoin's gone down. So are they really greedy or just adjusting to the fluctuating price of Bitcoin?
Bitcoin has been hurt by Bitcoin, Mt. Gox's problems and various other problems, and Russia outlawing them and so forth.
Bitcoin's down on Gox to 285 now.
Well, Mt. Gox is essentially out of the game at the moment. I mean, it is still $100 at like 3 other exchanges. It's actually north of six. I'm sorry, did I say $100? $600.
Okay.
North of $600, and so that's $3,000 is that they're asking for.
Wow.
And it was once 300, so it's 10 times. It went from 300 to 3,000 that they're now asking for, which I think is probably asking too much. I think, yes, as we talked about last week, a law firm lost all their documents. They might pay $3,000 if they were sure they could get it back. But wow, lots of users are just going to say, okay, well, I just, so we lost all of our photos of Aunt May. Too bad. So, Bitcoin protocol. Until recently, we really did believe there were no problems with it. I mean, it has withstood a huge amount of analysis. It turns out that something known as transaction malleability has surfaced, and it is what brought Mt. Gox into so much grief. IEEE Spectrum had a nice piece where they explain what's going on. They said, in order to understand transaction malleability, you need to know that the balances of all Bitcoin addresses are maintained on a public ledger, and that the changes made to this ledger are what constitute a transfer of funds. When a transaction is broadcast to the network, it is relayed with a digital fingerprint that identifies it. Bitcoin miners then scoop it up, verify it, and send it on to the rest of the network for confirmation. Once the transaction has been confirmed, there's no way for that same person to spend those same Bitcoins because they are being checked against the public ledger. The malleability feature or defect allows a person to intervene right after the transaction request has been sent. It's possible to modify the fingerprint and create a duplicate transaction. So now you have 2 unconfirmed transactions flying around the network. They're both for the same exact payment, but they have different fingerprints, and only one of them can be added to the public ledger. So Andreas Antonopoulos, Chief Security Officer for the blockchain.info Bitcoin wallet, said, quote, "The first one that is confirmed will be accounted for in the blockchain and will become the definitive record. The other will be dropped as a double-spent attempt." So all of that is working. That is, the system is fundamentally working. It turns out that it's an error in the way Mt. Gox was auditing the blockchain to verify transactions, something that they alone were doing in a particular way, which we can blame it on their implementation, which allowed attackers to spoof non-successful transactions which were deliberately created by this malleability. They could spoof non-successful transactions in order to get Mt. Gox to issue refunds. So the community feels that this is something that needs to be resolved in the protocol. That is, it needs to be firmed up, and an agreed upon way to establish auditing needs to be established within the community. But here's the point is all Bitcoin users need to do for now to be safe is to deliberately not issue transactions too rapidly. If you allow 10 minutes for a transaction to take hold in the network, then you have nothing to worry about. There's no way then for any mischief to be accomplished by bad guys. But this is a little softer than we thought, the Bitcoin protocol was. My final bit of bad news.
Before you do that,
okay,
may I do a little bit of business?
Sure, some good news.
And then, yeah, actually, it is kind of timely. This is news, something you may want to check out if you are spending any time on that scary place called the internet.
Wow.
You might. OpenVPN is still good, right?
Yes.
Just checking. Okay. No exploits there, right?
No known vulnerabilities.
Okay,
in OpenVPN.
that's a relief. ProXPN is an OpenVPN provider that will help you use the internet the way it really was intended, without oversight, without your ISP spying on you, without governmental restrictions, geographic restrictions. It is a way of getting on the net securely from an open access spot, because all of your traffic emerges from your computer with strong encryption wrapped around it, hugging it tight to keep it safe out there in the real world. ProXPN is a really great way to do this because they're hosted all over the world, including Singapore, London, and Amsterdam. That means your data can emerge on the public internet in one of those countries, so no geographic restrictions should stop you. This is the kind of software that dissidents in countries like China use to see what's going on in the real world. It's a shame that we have to be like that. But, with ISPs these days, watching everything you do, the 6 strikes rules, CISPA, PIPA, and all of that, it's great to have this in your pocket. By the way, not just on your desktop, ProXPN has mobile apps now for Android as well as iOS that allow you to use that strong OpenVPN on your mobile as well. So take a look at that new ProXPN app for Android in the Google Play Store. OpenVPN is supported easily, quickly, transparently. We talked, I don't know if I talked about it on this show, but we've talked about the fellow who was noticed that Comcast was slowing down his Netflix to basically unusable. And just as a kind of experiment, he used an OpenVPN server at his university. And all of a sudden, it's 2 megabits. The video is high quality. And he said, this is complete proof that my ISP is slowing down Netflix traffic. ProXPN accepts payments through Visa, PayPal, and yes, Bitcoin. You can visit proxpn.com/twit and learn all about it and get a special deal. Normally, it's $10 a month, $75 for a year, but if you use our special offer code, SN20, right now at proxpn.com/twit, you'll get 20% off, not for the first month or year, but the lifetime of your account. That means ProXPN and all that security and privacy is less than $5 a month on the yearly plan. That's a great deal. And, of course, if you're not satisfied, cancel within 7 days. It'll cost you nothing. proxpn.com/twit. Find out more at the website, then sign up with the offer code SN20, and you shall be protected, my friends, upon that awful sea we call the internet. proxpn.com/twit. We thank him so much for the support of Security Now. And now the last bit of Sisyphean bad news.
So we talked about how one of the problems with the Wemo devices is that they're not authenticating SSL certs. It turns out they're not alone. Netcraft, that's been around forever, the really great internet usage monitoring, characterizing service, has discovered dozens of rogue, they call them, self-signed SSL certificates used to impersonate high-profile sites. So remember, what this means is, like, if Facebook they're not a CA, they're not a certificate authority themselves. So they purchase their certificates from someone. For example, actually, I think it is my certificate provider, DigiCert. It was when I noticed that Facebook was using DigiCert that I thought, well, if they are, then it must be recognized by everybody, so I'll use them too. And as I mentioned last week, I'm so happy with DigiCert. So the point is that Facebook certificate will be signed by DigiCert, and the browser knows has DigiCert's certificate in its list of certificate authorities that it trusts. So the browser is able to verify that a third party, DigiCert, signed Facebook's certificate. A self-signed certificate is, for example, it'll say www.facebook.com, and it'll be signed by Facebook, which really doesn't provide any value because anyone can make their own certificate that they sign. And in fact, there are some websites that want SSL but don't want to pay, the freight of having DigiCert or, GoDaddy or any of the other cert providers sign their certificates, so they'll self-sign them. And you get an error. Your browser gives you an error when you try to go there saying, oh, this certificate is non-trusted. And then you can decide if you want to go ahead and trust it anyway, because you'll get the privacy side, the encryption of SSL, but you don't actually know who you're connected to. That is, the certificate says www.facebook.com, but if you have agreed to accept a certificate that signed itself, then it could be anybody who made that certificate, not Facebook, who had to prove their identity to the certificate authority in order to get the certificate authority to sign their certificate. So the system works, but it only works if there's this chain of trust. So what has been found is a repository, essentially, of self-signed certs impersonating high-profile sites. And the danger is that there would be applications that real people use that aren't checking in the same way that Wemo, AC plugs and light switches and so forth are not checking. What if more important things weren't checking? Well, researchers from Stanford University and the University of Texas at Austin found broken SSL certificate validation in Amazon's EC2 Java library, Amazon's and PayPal's merchant SDKs, integrated shopping carts such as OS Commerce and ZenCart, which are very popular, and AdMob code used by mobile websites. What that means is that they're accepting SSL connections and not checking to see if the certificate, they're looking to see if it's valid. Does the checksum, is that correct? But they're accepting self-signed certificates. And it also turns out that online banking apps for mobile devices, which are, of course, tempting targets for man-in-the-middle attacks, are also falling short. They're also not checking certificates. In an analysis that was made, 40% of iOS-based banking apps tested by, and here's the company we talked about earlier, IOActive, are vulnerable to such attacks because they fail. 40% of iOS-based banking apps, because they fail to validate the authenticity of SSL certificates presented by the server. 41% of selected Android apps were found to be vulnerable in tests performed by performed at Leibniz University of Hanover and Philips Leibniz of Hanover and Philips University of Marburg in Germany. So what we have is a situation where users are trusting, and for whatever reason, apps are initiating SSL connections. For example, you would have a Bank of America app, and it's initiating on your behalf a connection to B of A, and I'm just making that up. I don't know if B of A is one of them or not, but for example, B of A. So you're using the B of A app in your device, and it is giving you privacy because it is using SSL, but when it's connecting to B of A at bofa.com, the B of A server is sending back a certificate. The app itself is assuming that's sort of like the wrong logic. It knows it's connecting to B of A, and it knows that B of A is valid, so it assumes the certificate that it's going to get from B of A is valid. But if a man in the middle intercepts that connection, that man in the middle can return a certificate for B of A that is not signed by a real certificate authority, but just it's self-signed. And the app, the 40% of apps in iOS, 41% in Android that were checked are not verifying the remote certificate. They're assuming it's correct. And that assumption opens those apps up to attack by man-in-the-middle impersonation. And there's no doubt, now that this news is out, that we're going to see people saying, I want to test these apps and find out for myself which ones are vulnerable. And if anyone uses those apps while they are vulnerable, their information is not safe. It can be decrypted by the man in the middle that then turns around and re-encrypts it as it goes off to B of A. So essentially, you lose all of the privacy that the app is trying to provide to its user. And, a substantial portion of apps today are not verifying the SSL certificate chain as they should.
I don't know if he knew ahead of time about this or he just is prescient or what, but Kaspersky said this exactly. He said banking apps on Android in particular are going to be the next big problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do a lot of banking, frankly, on my phone.
On your phone.
A lot of it, yeah.
So we will need to have it'll be interesting to see. It's not hard to do, actually. I bet some researchers will figure out which apps are vulnerable because it'd be nice to know.
Yeah.
So we're into my last little notes. I did want to mention that, as I mentioned last week, I mentioned to you, I don't know if we were recording or not, that I was going to see Ender's Game for the second time with my buddy on Saturday who had never seen it. I liked it more the second time, I think because my expectations were appropriately set. I had read the book, and of course, no movie ever lives up to what the book is. You just can't, in a couple hours, provide as much richness and detail, no matter what you do. But I thought it was fine. I thought it was. I was much less impressed the first time than I was the second time around. So I just want to mention that. And Jenny and I saw RoboCop on Monday. I guess that was yesterday, and it far exceeded both of our expectations. I didn't have much expectation, admittedly, but I was very impressed. It was definitely worthwhile. So if people have been on the fence, if they're in love with the original one and are wondering, I think it was good. I liked it. And we did see a preview for something called Transcendence coming out mid-April. Oh, it looks fabulous.
And we know how accurate previews are.
Yeah.
What a good indicator of the strength of a movie.
True.
I always wonder if the best parts were in the preview.
I don't know how this movie could be bad, given what we saw.
Okay.
It just looked, it was Daniel Suarez-esque in the notion of, it's not giving anything away because the previews do, of someone having their consciousness uploaded to the net and things don't go well. We'll just put it that way.
Johnny Depp.
Yes.
Depp is in this.
Yeah, it looks great. And I wanted our listeners to know that the Squirrel UI page is up now. It's number 6 of, I think there's like 20 of them now, and it's where I'm currently working. I've been talking about this the last few weeks, that I am now at work on the UI. And I think you'll see anyone looking at the Squirrel UI that I've got designed so far will first of all, you'll get a sense for what the typical user will see. And it is simple and easy to use. I mean, that's where I'm struggling, is to make it so. But anyway, you can go to grc.com/squirrel, look at the Squirrel login in the main menu. But I did create a bit.ly link that takes you right there, bit.ly/SQRLUI. So just Squirrel UI. Anyway, I'm really happy with the way it's coming. It's slow going, but I'm intending, as you'll see there, what you'll see is finished product. I mean, I am designing the experience that the user will have as they use the product, and then it's a matter of wiring up the code behind the UI. So, making good progress.
Excellent. Excellent. Steve is the man when it comes to security. We do this show, Security Now, each and every Tuesday now.
Yes.
At 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 2100 UTC on twit.tv if you'd like to watch live. If not, don't forget, after the fact, always available audio and video. In fact, Steve does an unusual thing. He orders transcripts. Elaine Ferris writes those. He puts those on his website along with 16 kilobit audio versions at grc.com. So when you head over there to get Spin Right, and I know that's why you're going over there, because that is the world's finest hard drive maintenance recovery utility, pick up a copy of Security Now as well. And all the other good stuff that Steve does, absolutely free. A Q&A episode next week, news allowing, so you can leave your questions there too, grc.com/feedback. And if you want to get full quality audio and video of this show, we have it at twit.tv/SN. And of course, you can subscribe wherever finer podcasts are aggregated. We'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Leo.